December 4, 1872, the Canadian brigantine Dei Gratia is sailing on the Atlantic Ocean midway between the Azores and the coast of Portugal. A helmsman spots something on the horizon heading toward the ship, and he quickly notifies Captain David Morehouse. Captain comes on the deck and sees a vessel heading unsteadily towards Dei Gratia at a distance of about 6 miles. Captain thought something was amiss because of the ship's unusual movements and the peculiar way her sails were rigged. He sends his men to board the ship, and when they got on board, they find the ship abandoned. This is the story of Mary Celeste. Mary Celeste was built in Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, and launched under British registration as Amazon in 1861. The ship was 99.3 feet long, 25.5 feet broad, 11.7 feet deep, and had 198 gross tonnage. In June 18, 61, the ship embarked on her maiden voyage to Five Islands, Nova Scotia, carrying timber for London. The captain immediately fell ill and his condition worsened. The ship returned to Spencer's Island and when resumed the voyage to London, in the course of which ship encountered further misadventures. She collided with fishing equipment in the Narrows off Eastport, Maine, and after leaving London ran into and sank a brig in the English Channel. In October 1867, she was driven ashore in a storm and severely damaged, leading to her owners abandoning her. She was later restored by American mariner Richard W. Haynes in November 1868. She was transferred to American ownership and registration in 1868, when she acquired her new name Mary Celeste. The ship underwent a $10,000 refit, enlarged significantly, and increased tonnage to 282.28. In October 1872, Captain Benjamin Briggs took command of Mary Celeste for her first voyage following her extensive New York refit, which was to take her to Genoa in Italy. Benjamin Briggs was born in Wareham, Massachusetts, on April 24, 1835, one of 5 sons of Sea Captain Nathan Briggs. Briggs chose the crew for this voyage with care. First mate Albert G. Richardson had sailed under Briggs before. Second mate Andrew Gilling, aged about 25. The steward, newly married Edward William Head. The 4 general seamen were Germans from the Frisian Islands, the brothers Volkert and Bos Lorenzen, Arian Martins, and Gottlieb Gaudskal. On October 20, 1872, Briggs arrived at Pier 50, on the East River in New York City, to supervise the loading of the ship's cargo of 1,701 barrels of alcohol. On the morning of Tuesday, November 5, Mary Celeste left Pier 50 and moved into New York Harbor. The weather was uncertain, and Briggs decided to wait for better conditions. He anchored the ship just off Staten Island. The weather eased 2 days later, and Mary Celeste left the harbor and entered the Atlantic. While Mary Celeste prepared to sail, the Canadian brigantine Dei Gratia lay nearby in Hoboken, New Jersey, awaiting a cargo of petroleum destined for Genoa via Gibraltar. Dei Gratia departed for Gibraltar on November 15, following the same general route 8 days after Mary Celeste. Dei Gratia had reached midway between the Azores and the coast of Portugal at about Wednesday, December 4, 1872. Captain Morehouse came on deck, and the helmsman reported a vessel heading unsteadily towards Dei Gratia at a distance of about 6 miles. The ship's erratic movements and the odd set of her sails led Morehouse to suspect that something was wrong. As the vessel drew close, he could see nobody on deck, and he received no reply to his signals, so he sent First Mate Oliver DeVoe and Second Mate John Wright in a ship's boat to investigate. The pair finds that this was the Mary Celeste by the name on her stern. They then climbed aboard and found the ship deserted. The sails were partly set and in a poor condition, some missing altogether, and much of the rigging was damaged, with ropes hanging loosely over the sides. The main hatch cover was secure, but the fore and lazarette hatches were open, their covers beside them on the deck. The ship's single lifeboat was a small yawl that had apparently been stowed across the main hatch, but it was missing, while the binnacle housing the ship's compass had shifted from its place and its glass cover was broken. There was about 3.5 feet of water in the hold, a significant but not alarming amount for a ship of this size. A makeshift sounding rod, a device for measuring the amount of water in the hold, was found abandoned on the deck. They found the ship's daily log in the mate's cabin, and its final entry was dated at 8 a.m. on November 25, 9 days earlier. It recorded Mary Celeste's nearly 400 nautical miles or 740 kilometers from the point where Dei Gratia encountered her. Deveau saw that the cabin interiors were wet and untidy from water that had entered through doorways and skylights, but were otherwise in reasonable order. He found personal items scattered about Briggs' cabin, including a sheathed sword under the bed, but most of the ship's papers were missing, along with the captain's navigational instruments. Galley equipment was neatly stowed away. There was no food prepared or under preparation, but there were ample provisions in the stores. There were no obvious signs of fire or violence. The evidence indicated an orderly departure from the ship by means of the missing lifeboat. First Mate Deveau returned to report these findings to Morehouse, who decided to bring the derelict into Gibraltar. Morehouse divided Dei Gratia's crew of 8 between the two vessels, sending Deveau and 2 experienced seamen to Mary Celeste while he and 4 others remained on Dei Gratia. The weather was relatively calm for most of the way to Gibraltar, but each ship was seriously undercrewed and progress was slow. Dei Gratia reached Gibraltar on December 12. Mary Celeste had encountered fog and arrived on the following morning. She was immediately impounded by the Vice Admiralty Court to prepare for salvage hearings. On December 23, examination of Mary Celeste, carried out by John Austin, surveyor of shipping, and Ricardo Portunato. Austin noted cuts on the bow, possibly caused by a sharp instrument, and found blood on the captain's sword. He also found a vial of sewing machine oil found upright in its place. Portunato's report on the hull concluded that the ship had not been involved in a collision or run aground. Royal Naval captains endorsed Austin's opinion that the bow cuts were deliberate, and they found stains on one of the ship's rails and a deep mark possibly caused by an axe. Flood also believed that Morehouse and his men were hiding something. Flood's theories of mutiny and murder were set back when scientific analysis of stains on the ship showed they were not blood. Gibraltar's evidence did not support Flood's theories of murder and conspiracy, but suspicion of foul play persisted. Flood and newspaper reports initially suspected insurance fraud on Winchester, based on Mary Celeste's overinsured policy. However, Winchester refuted these allegations, and no inquiry was instituted by insurance companies. In 1931, an article suggested Morehouse could have lured Briggs and his crew aboard Dei Gratia, but Paul Begg argues this ignores Dei Gratia's slower speed. Some say that Briggs and Morehouse may have conspired to share salvage proceeds, but no evidence of friendship exists. Some questions their motives and why Briggs abandoned his son Arthur, despite intending to permanently disappear. A theory about pirates attacking ship was surfaced. Riffian pirates were active off Morocco's coast in the 1870s, but the captain and crew's personal possessions were left undisturbed. Historian John Gilbert Lockhart suggested Briggs killed all on board and then himself in a fit of religious mania, but later withdrew this theory. Arthur N. Putman, a prominent investigator, proposed a theory why only one lifeboat was missing from the vessel Mary Celeste. He found the boat's rope cut, suggesting quick abandonment. The ship's log mentioned ominous rumbling and explosions, but Putman suggested a more intense explosion caused by a sailor igniting fumes. In panic, the captain, family, and crew boarded the lone lifeboat, cut the rope, and abandoned Mary Celeste. Some extraordinary and alarming circumstance must have arisen to cause the entire crew to abandon a sound and seaworthy ship with ample provisions. Based on the sounding rod found on deck, it is suggested that Briggs abandoned ship after a false sounding because of a malfunction, perhaps of the pumps, that created a false impression that the vessel was rapidly accumulating water. A severe waterspout strike before the abandonment could explain the amount of water in the ship and the ragged state of her rigging and sails. Low pressure generated by the spout could have driven water from the bilges up into the pumps, leading the crew to overestimate the amount of water on Mary Celeste and believe that she was in danger of sinking. Other explanations include the possible appearance of a displaced iceberg, the fear of running aground while becalmed, and a sudden submarine earthquake. Hydrographical evidence suggests that an iceberg drifting so far south was improbable and other ships would have seen it. Another theory supposes that Briggs feared that his ship would run aground and launched the yawl in the hope of reaching land. The wind could then have lifted and blown Mary Celeste away from the reef, while the rising sea swamped and sank the yawl. The weakness of this theory is that if the ship had been becalmed, all sails would have been set to catch any available breeze, yet it was found with many of its sails furled. An earthquake on the seabed could have caused sufficient turbulence on the surface to damage parts of Mary Celeste's cargo, thus releasing noxious fumes. Rising fears of an imminent explosion could have led Briggs to order the ship's abandonment. The displaced hatches suggest that an inspection, or an attempted airing, had taken place. A seepage of alcohol through a few porous barrels as the source of gases that may have caused or threatened an explosion in Mary Celeste's hold. A sufficiently alarming scenario. The rumblings from the hold, the smell of escaping fumes, and possibly an explosion could have caused Briggs to have ordered the evacuation of the ship. In his haste to leave the ship before it exploded, Briggs may have failed to properly secure the yawl to the tow line. A sudden breeze could have blown the ship away from the occupants of the yawl, leaving them to succumb to the elements. The lack of damage from an explosion and the generally sound state of the cargo upon discovery tend to weaken this case. Chambers's journal of September 17, 1904, suggests that the entire complement of Mary Celeste was plucked off one by a giant octopus or squid. In 1924, the Daily Express published a story by Captain R. Lucy. In this tale, Briggs and his crew are cast in the role of predators. They sight a derelict steamer, which they board and find deserted with gold and silver in its safe. They decide to split the money, abandon Mary Celeste, and seek new lives in Spain, which they reach by using the steamer's lifeboats. Similar fantasies have considered theories of abduction by aliens in flying saucers. Mary Celeste was not the first reported case of a ship being found strangely deserted on the high seas. In October 1955, MV Joyita, a 70-ton motor vessel, disappeared in the South Pacific while traveling between Samoa and Tokelau, with 25 people on board. The vessel was found a month later, deserted and drifting north of Vanuatu, 600 miles from its route. None of those aboard were seen again, and a commission of inquiry failed to establish an explanation. At Spencer's Island, Mary Celeste and her lost crew are commemorated by a monument at the site of the brigantine's construction and by a memorial outdoor cinema built in the shape of the vessel's hull. Postage stamps commemorating the incident have been issued by Gibraltar and by the Maldives. So that's all we got about Mary Celeste, and thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button. And if you have something to say, please leave a comment.